Hey everyone, welcome to part one of our sport techniques for custom residential and commercial floors. My name's Todd Schutte with the Bona e-learning team. I'm joined today by Phil Sanchez, our senior sport sales manager, and Bob Mohr, who's machine tech services, and also our studio tech for helping out here in the studio and some of the e-learning stuff we do. So we're going to go through some sport techniques, but we're going to talk about them with how do I take this and then transfer them to residential setting or even a commercial setting, say an office building. You could even do a school or something like that, but up in the front office or out in the lobbies and stuff, not necessarily doing a gym floor. But how can I use it to customize, right? It's an upsell opportunity. It's a chance for me to separate myself from the competition. And it involves a lot of different elements, not just paint, not just stencils, but we're talking custom stain colors, paint and stain mixed together, paint and sealer mixed together, what we call glaze, doing custom designs with blue tape and or stencil type material. So there's so many different facets and things you can do with this. We just want you guys to think outside the box a little bit. So I'm going to start off with a question for Phil, but relate for everybody just the artistic development you've seen in sport floors over the years.
Sure. I mean, it's been fun to watch, and it's gone pretty quick. I mean, we're used to seeing back in 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, is really just block letters, straight lines, solid keys, solid painted three-point wings, to really seeing that whatever these graphic designers these days can create, we're starting to see more and more of that being able to be achieved on the floor. And that's with a combination of some of our paints and stains and just some of our work here in the office and work on the floors and work with contractors, just kind of pushing the limits a little bit. They're really starting to create some really fun and creative looks that each week, each month we start to see something new, and it's pretty exciting.
And even with, I know you were telling me earlier about even with like stencils, right? Not just painting those solid, but even guys coming in with airbrushes.
Coming in with airbrushes, coming in with different colored glazes really, and kind of bringing the two together. Or, airbrush, like you said, that's a big thing, and it gives a lot of new ways to just make something really pop on the floor.
Yeah. Talk about glaze a little bit. I know it's something that you really push and like to talk about, and to me, especially from sport floors, what I've seen is it's been a big plus or advantage of getting away from solid painted areas because of the issues those can cause. But tell us about how that came about.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, it's fast and it's convenient and it's quick. And I think that's one of the things the guys like, is that you can create so many new looks with it without really changing the process that you're doing. It doesn't take a new product, doesn't take a new learning curve. It really takes what we've done in the past with products and just bringing them together to create something new. So they like the quickness of it. They like the quick drying time of it. They like that you can use it with water-based or oil-based. The dry times, I mean, there's just so many benefits to it, once you learn it, once you feel comfortable with it. And that's what we've been doing I've been doing it for the last 8-10 years, is really focusing on the benefits of what we can do with that and how our customers can benefit from that. Not only can they create new looks, but it's a way for them to bring in a little bit more revenue too, because you don't necessarily have to do this just at the beginning or on raw wood. You can do this during a recoat if you want. You can add color during a recoat, which is a pretty big thing, without having to go down to raw wood. So there's a lot of exciting things that you can do with this process.
Yeah, that's actually a good point that I wasn't thinking of, is adding it later, right? It doesn't have to be right when you start, but you can change it up even when you're doing the recoat.
And I think one good example, when we really saw the benefit to this, was a school had done a three-point dark stain, or kind of a lighter stain. It was light actually, with coats of 350 on top, which is a pretty darker oil color. And so with multiple coats over the years, that color faded, that glaze, that stain faded to where it was just really non-existent anymore. We went through, abraded it, put a darker brown stain, just did the three-point wings, coated it with 350, and boom, popped. And so that was a really big benefit for the school without having the expense of going all the way down to raw wood. Right. So there's a lot you can do with it.
Right. Awesome. And that was really in conjunction with Prater's, right? So we'll talk a lot about Prater's flooring, but I guess the point here for the webinar, they're out of Chattanooga, sport floor contractor, really so some of the most innovative people that I know on that side of the business. But get to know the sport floor contractors in your area, because whether it's going to them for stencils or talking to them about some of the different techniques they use, it'd be a good relationship to have, just knowing who those sport guys are in your area and being able to talk to them and help out when needed. But Bob, I think you know, for people watching this and talking about degree of difficulty, you know, they're going to see us do a lot of different things on these different panels on this floor. But I know when you and I walked into Chaparral in 2012 and then 2013, first time either of us had been on a sport floor, and you know, it looked pretty daunting, but how quickly did you feel comfortable in what we were doing there?
Yeah, in 2012 was actually like my first year that I started working at Bona, so I had some of those initial nerves kind of coming in. But seeing these vinyl decals that were 20 by 20, these massive decals, you know, we had some kind of initial nerves of not wanting to mess anything up. But once we put the first one down, everything went so smooth and it was so easy to do. The next ones, they kind of just fell right into place. And you know, we had some trial and error as we were going, but it was actually really easy, and we felt a lot more comfortable doing the next ones we were doing.
Yeah, and I think for the most part, I mean, what everybody's going to see here is, you know, single layer decals or single stencils, where those stencils that we were using on Shap, there was 5 different, because they were so big, right, you couldn't have it just in a single piece. But like you said, once we got used to working with those, and once we found out how to fix our screw-ups, right? Blue tape comes in handy for those too. Once we got to the second layer, then I think we were really comfortable with what was going on. But we learned a lot of lessons there too with how to paint. That feathering was important with paint too, because we had to go back and redo some of the paint, even though it's solid, right? And you can't see through it. You don't feather, you see stop-start marks, and then those are going to show through on your finish as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then colors, I think. One thing that we've found out, or you know, a big explosion on the sports side of the business also, is really water-based, and especially water-based finishes going on top. And it's to keep those colors true, because if you put oil on top, which you can, but it's going to yellow things out. Especially your whites. Now your white will still probably yellow a little bit just because of oils in the paint. Even the water-based paint will yellow just a little bit. But if you want to keep all the colors true, then it's really using water-based, because that's those big stencils or the big logos and stuff out in front. That's their branding now. Sure. You know, that's what the schools stand for, or the NBA team, or whatever, and they want it to really maintain that vibrancy.
Yeah, and that's a big part of it. You're absolutely right, the vibrancy, and that's something you can achieve with water-based, not so much with oil-based. But you know, a lot of these schools, a lot of these facilities will spend a lot of money on their graphics, and they're wanting custom colors, which is something we've really seen grown quite a bit over the last 5 years. But you want to keep it, like you said, true. You don't want that color to change. A bright pink or a bright green will change quite drastically when you start putting oil on top. So by keeping that water base on top, absolutely you'll keep that color true, which, you know, they like that at the end of the day.
And we think it's important, just again, if you're going to customize somebody's house, maybe it's a child's playroom, maybe it's the office, maybe it's the man cave downstairs, or you're working on a commercial job, restaurant, bar. Again, those colors that they're putting down and that custom work that you're doing, you want to protect it, but you don't want it to discolor over time. I mean, it's hard enough to maintain and take care of some of those, especially commercial facilities, but we want to protect it. So it just speaks more to using water-based finish over the top. But we'll also talk about with finishes in general, and then using the sheen, right? Don't think that this is a little bit of the outside of the box thinking. Don't think that I just need to use all traffic satin on this floor or all gloss finish. You can use different sheens of the finish then to help highlight some of that custom work that you're doing.
Absolutely, yeah.
How else? What else do you guys think about from a customization point of view? Anything else come to mind?
I mean, I think right now what's exciting is there's so many opportunities. There's so many ways to get creative, and I think that's what we're seeing. One of the most common questions we get is, here's the design, how do we achieve it? In most cases, we're able to find a way to achieve that look, and at the end result, they're super happy with it, because you do have a lot of ways to achieve that look, and I think we've developed that. We've kind of uncovered a lot of those ways, which is pretty exciting.
I think the other thing here, Bob, and you can probably relate to this too, especially working, being a second generation floor guy, doing a lot of work with your dad and uncle when you were growing up, now the work you've done with Bona. But I mean, just doing a straight regular floor, right? A lot of personal satisfaction, instant gratification doing that. But how did you feel when we came out of Chaparral or Lutheran and did some of those jobs? I mean, was it an increased level of look what I did here?
Yeah, no, it was definitely exciting and really kind of just mixing up the mundane, 2 1/4 red oak, white oaks, regular sand and finish. And, it did add some kind of new excitement, seeing new products, and really it kind of opened my eyes to some different ideas. We were talking earlier about some border work, different things, and glazes, and I'm sure we'll talk more about glazes. So yeah, no, it opens up more profitability for you and some different options for what you can do for your business.
Yep. All right, so that's it for our intro. We may go change some clothes. We may stay in these ones, but we'll be right back, and we're going to jump right into the demonstrations on these floors.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Bona Training Center here in Denver, Colorado. We are going to go now to the glaze process, and what we're going to be doing here is showing you how to achieve a very beautiful blue color using a water-based glaze. So some of the products that you're going to need to use, and what we recommend using for this process, is you start with your colorant, which is going to be whatever color you choose. Here we're going to use a blue today of Bona Sport Paint. The base color you're going to use is, or the base product you use is Bona Intense Seal. If you're using, or if you're picking up from a residential or commercial application, you can use Bona Intense Seal that comes in gallons, or you can get a larger 5-gallon pail that's Bona Sport DTS. So those are the two products that you're going to bring together to use as the colorant. What you'll also want to pick up are different ways to get different volumes of paint. So you can use this little pool guy, you can use a cup, larger cup, whatever you might need to get the color out, and another measuring bucket or cup that's going to allow you to create the ratio or get the ratio that you want in order to get that color. Another option that we want to show here is a scale. Depending on how accurate you want to get, whenever we use custom colored paints, we do it by weight, and that's going to give you the most accurate color. If you want to, or you don't need to be that accurate and you're just looking for volume, you can also do by volume, which if you're careful you can get very close and almost right on with that as well, but that gives you two different options to achieve this. We're just going to go with a 1:16 ratio today. Some of the other things you're going to need are a stir stick. You can also use a paddle mixer with a drill if you need. It's good to have rags, gloves, and also a couple different applicators, and I'll go to why we need two applicators. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to mix this to a 1:16 ratio. 1 being paint, 16 parts being DTS or your sealer. I always do that. I forget to put my gloves on right off the bat, even when I talk about them. But here we go. All right. So first what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add my DTS, just so I know I get it to the 16 ounces that I want. And there's a nice little easy measuring thing right here. Make sure everything's good and stirred up before you get started, which I've already done. Okay, so we're at the 16 ounce there. I'm going to add a cup or an ounce of paint. Okay, that's about right, just a little bit more. Let's throw this up. So just make sure it's nice and stirred. This stuff blends pretty well, pretty easy, so you don't need to get too much unless you're using a big pail, getting a 5-gallon pail or something like that. I definitely recommend using a paddle mixer to get that done. Okay, so now it's gonna be nice and mixed up. I'm gonna set that aside real quick and just clear this area. Okay, so as I talked about, 2 applicators. The reason why I would like 2 applicators is you're going to have one applicator that's going to be used to really kind of get your color everywhere. And what I'm going to kind of do is I'm going to pour a line here and just spread it out with this first applicator just to make sure you're getting good coverage everywhere you want to have that colorant. Pour my line. Very similar like you do a finish pour, anything you do these days out in residentially on floors, sport floors, you just want to pour that initial line just like you would. So a lot of similarities. Here's where we kind of just smooth everything around. Get it there, get up to the lines. It's important to have the mask like we have here. You're going to want to come off and on that mask. That's one of the key things that we want to make sure everybody knows here is that you can't really feather like you would a finish because you might leave lines, you might leave streak lines, you might have other marks there. And so it's key to have these masks down, and I'll show you here in a second why. So now I've got the color pretty good, pretty consistent here. We're going with a nice blue, dark blue color. Okay, so now I've got that pretty much everywhere. And this could go a lot faster if you get, if you're on a larger sport floor, you can definitely get a different size applicator. So your first one there to get that around. Second one now is where you want to start and end on the mask. And you'll want that second one to be dry and to stay dry. And one of the things I like to do is either have a carpet or have a pad, rag, or here, but you want to keep it nice to where you can absorb it, because the key here is to not have the streaks. You want to avoid having any excess on there, so you don't get streaks, you don't leave lines, you don't leave lap lines. The key is to soak up and address any of the color that's going down. And you can do this a couple times. I'm doing a pretty dark color here. And as I mentioned, we did a 1:16 ratio here. Darker colors, we want typically a 1:16. Lighter colors, whites, oranges, red, like light reds, yellows, 1:8, 1:8. So now I'm just going to repeat that process down a few more times. And you got a little bit of time there too. If you get a miss or you see something, you're gonna have a little bit of time to go back and fix it. But the key is just to follow that board seam. Make sure you're not staying astray from that. Try to keep as straight as possible your lines. Okay, now I've got that pretty much everywhere again. And then going back again with your dry applicator. And like I said, if you have a rag there, that helps soak some of that up. But you want to keep that second one dry to the point where it can absorb that paint. Off and on the mask, just like that. See that? You gotta stay straight, otherwise you get a little bit of lines there, so that is important. It's important to pay attention to details on this. So you see here, one of the things that we're going to get running into here is we've got a baseboard. A lot of times, you got to keep in mind that you're not going to be able to feather this product. So as you go into baseboards, make sure you're taping off, making sure you have room to end and stop, or to start and stop off a mask. If you're going onto an edgeboard, you can use a cut and pad. That's definitely possible. But just want to keep that in mind that you're going to have to be really careful around those. So tape them up, that way if you do stray away a little bit, you're not going to end up with it on the wall. And if you do, another little trick that we like to see here too is you can paint a solid line, or if you have room, add that to part of your design. If a floor has maybe a board that kind of borders the room, tape that off, and then you can stain that or glaze that a different color. So you see I'm just kind of trying to smudge it around, get it everywhere so it's better coverage. And you can go with the grain, against the grain with this applicator, but once you do your final pull, you definitely want to keep that straight. Okay. I like to squeegee off just so you don't get that excess off of there. I think this is important to address too. I mean, with the darker colors, that's really one of the things we've learned over the years is to use lighter coats to achieve. Use lighter coats to achieve a dark coat. And initially it might be a little scary because you're putting a coat down and it's blue, but it comes as aqua blue or very light blue. Just keep going, keep doing your coats down, and you'll see that true color come to where it should be. So now we've got it glazed, we've got it down. If we're doing multiple coats, we'd give it probably 45 minutes roughly, depending on humidity. Again, that's always important to keep in mind is the humidity, the temperature, make sure the air is off. All those things can affect it, but once it's ready to go, in about 35, 45 minutes, you can put your second coat on and then go from there. So one of the things we want to address with this, and one of the differences, the questions we get all the time is, what's the difference between a stain and a glaze? And where would you use that application? And I think what we've noticed over the last 5-10 years is that, you know, with this glaze process, you still get that opaque look, you still get the grain to come through. So it does look like a stain, but it's not quite it's not penetrating as much as a stain. It's not where each grain is going to be a little bit different with the grain. This is really a top coat that goes over and really just pops the grain of the wood with that color that you're looking for. A lot of benefits to that, and I think one that's also worth talking about is schools in the life of the floor. You know, we're doing a lot of staining where it's dark colors, dark browns, blacks, different colors where we're really getting into that wood, and to sand that off, it takes a little bit. You know, it takes a little bit of the wood off. This comes off pretty easy with 80 grit, 100 grit. You could typically take this off, so it's going to help that length and that life of the floor over the course of its lifetime. So it's a great, quick, easy way to get a very nice, transparent, opaque look, really in any color you want, on top of that floor. So that's another added benefit and why we see this look really taking hold and seeing it along a lot of floors at every level. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna let this dry and we'll see what we need to do next.
All right, so we're going to do a demo here on using tape to create a custom stain job. So typically, you know, you're coming into a job and you're staining the floor all the same color. Maybe you've got some border work or something else that cuts it up, so then you stain it one color on one side of the border, and then inside the border you stain it another color. But typically, guys are coming in, right, and just staining all one color. So I'm recreating a piece here that a guy I know out in California, Jared Paris, actually I've known his father Glenn for probably 30 years, Jared for a little less because he's much younger than Glenn and I. But he did a dentist's office floor, I believe it was, like this. And I just thought it was again, a great example of thinking outside the box. And you know, he charged them for doing the custom work. And I think that's what it comes down to, right? Some people are gonna see this and say, oh, well, that takes so long to just tape everything out like that, I'm never gonna be able to make any money. If you're charging the right amount of money, you will make the right amount of money, right? But you have to know what your costs are, what your time is worth, and everything else. So, you know, when we're doing this, we're using good quality blue tapes. So, you know, 3M makes really good painter's tape. And know that there's regular, what they call white core, which tends to be a little stiffer. And then the orange core product is a little more translucent, and it's also a little more loose so you can flex it. If you need to do curves and stuff like that, the orange cord tape is easier to do that with. And also the narrower the tape is, right, it's going to be harder for me to pull a curve with 1.5 or 2 inch tape than it is with a 3/4 inch tape. And that's also one thing we should talk about, especially if you want to pull straight lines, right? Understand that it's pretty easy to manipulate this stuff. So you may think you're pulling something straight, but even if you twist it a little while you're putting it down, it's going to be curved, right? And not straight. So if you're trying to put down straight, you need to hold it with your thumb and pull it straight and then tap it down, right? And then when you're following that line across the floor, you're tapping it down, and then we will come back and roll it. But one, if I twist it a little bit while I'm putting it down, or if I just leave it loose and then just go up the floor like this, I'm pushing some loose tape ahead of myself, and I'm going to eventually get to a point where it kind of doubles up and gives me a wrinkle. So just pat it down first, and then you can come back and put the rest of it down. So orange core tape if you want to do curves or circles. Regular blue tape if probably you're keeping everything straighter. All right, and wider tape is going to be easier to keep lines straight. The narrower it is, the easier it is to manipulate it a little bit and accidentally put a curve in it. The other thing to remember when we're doing tape designs, whether you're doing a stain, which we'll do on this one, we'll do another one behind here, and we're going to do a checkerboard pattern, and we'll do alternating squares of the blue glaze that Phil did and solid blue paint to show you the differences in those two. But we're going to be using a lot of blue tape on that as well. Anywhere that the tape comes together, you've got to put a little fingernail mark in it, right, to shut that down. Otherwise, I've got a little space right there, and if I don't do that, it's going to bleed right under there, and I'm going to see all of those lines when I get done putting my product down. So again, regardless of whether it's paint, glaze, stain, I want to put a little fingernail mark on the side that I'm going to be putting product down to prevent that from leaking under. I would even go so far as to, when I come back, so it's going to take me a while to even just tape out this square, but when I come back to it, right before I want to put down whatever particular color in the particular squares, I'm going to redo any of my fingernail marks just to make sure that those are fresh and that hopefully the paint or the tape is held down right there so I don't get any bleed under. If you're doing a ton of tape, I would also recommend putting a glove on whatever hand you tend to be dominant with, because as I'm going through, you also need to smooth this out. And it's also easy if you're doing a ton of tape, like on a sport job, and you're smoothing this down, that with your smoothing hand, it's easy to get a tape burn on your fingers, and you won't know it until it hurts real bad, and then it's too late. You've already got blisters, it's already coming up. So just wear a glove on the one hand to kind of protect yourself there. It's also something that if you've got some really long boards, right, don't take your tape and start it down here and stretch it all the way to the other side. Whoops. So even if I get it tacked down there pretty quick, pretty good, I don't want to bring it all the way to this other side. Just hit it there. Now this one actually turned out just fine because it actually ran down the line just fine, although it may have actually even come over. So really what you want to do when you're taping is just stretch out a little bit at a time and then press it right down on the board seam there. And if you screw it up a little bit, you can always just pull it real quick. Okay? Stick it down right there. Stick it down here. okay? Do it a little at a time so you really make sure, because our boards aren't always just dead straight. And we can't always pull the tape just dead straight. So we got two things working against us. So just use a little bit at a time. Place it flat. And again, if I need to, if I curved it a little bit there, just pull it up a little bit before you start your next little section. Pull it up. Right, and that way I'm assuring myself that I'm getting nice straight lines. So one more thing we want to cover on doing a tape design or something like this is obviously we're going to have to trim some of it away. So again, regardless of whether I'm doing water-based sealers, glaze, stains, whatever I'm doing in this design, I want to be careful with my utility knife because I don't want to create cross scratches in the floor with it. So you want to be able to see what you're doing, right? And if I get on one side, on the other, sometimes I can't see exactly where I'm cutting. So I'd rather put it on the inside here. And then with very light pressure, I want to start exactly on my edge, bring it across, and hopefully end right on that edge. Don't get sloppy and pull it out into the floor here, because now I just created a knife scratch going across there. But if you do nice trim work, squaring everything up, you've got a nice straight line. I can go ahead and do my fingernail marks to just close those little gaps. And I've got a nice square edge then for my design. So use a nice sharp utility knife. Be very precise in making your trim lines. Don't go out into the floor, because you can see then I'd be putting some pretty serious cross-grain scratches in the floor that are going to show up, especially if I'm using anything that has any color or pigments or anything else in it. And then also different widths. So I don't have to do everything the same size. For this one I am, because I'm really trying to give myself a little bit of a safety area for when I'm putting the stain on, that I don't accidentally get into a board that I don't need to be getting into. But if I thought I was real careful or I was doing something else a little different, I could use narrower tape, going to cost me a little less. And then the frog tape as well. Frog tape or the 3M edge lock. They're specially treated so that when they get hit by water, there's a little chemical reaction that happens on that edge, swells a little bit to give you a really nice clean line. So even though they cost a little more, understand that those two tapes, frog tape and the 3M edge lock, they're treated special to work with water-based products to give you that nice clean line. Typically when people are painting the walls, you know, like a bedroom or an office or whatever, but it works great on floors too, especially when we're using glaze, when we're using different sealers. Not so much with stain. It's not going to do you any worse to use those products, but it's really affected by water and not so much by solvents. All right. But again, we'll finish taping out this floor, but it's just an example of, again, how to think outside the box a little bit. And you'll even see here that, you know, I'm not just following the board seams all just as they happen, so I'm not keeping everything 5-inch. This one I actually brought out, you know, about 1 3/4 boards to block it off, so I could actually make it look like I've got different shape or different sized boards, you know, randomly placed throughout this floor if I'm doing it like this as well. So even though we're following straight lines, you don't have to follow all the straight lines. Think outside the box a little bit, give your customers something really custom. And I guarantee when you walk in, like I did when I saw pictures of Jared Paris's floor that he did for that dentist, I just said, wow, that is really cool. I've never seen anything like that. That's the kind of reaction you want from your customer.
Hey guys, welcome back. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go and we're going to talk a little bit about second coats and why it was important with glaze. And really it's good to identify this early on and what kind of color you're looking to achieve. We can move the ratios around quite a bit. In a lot of cases, in most cases for darker colors, dark blues like this, blacks, dark reds, you want to do a lighter coat and multiple coats. So probably typically 2 to 3 coats of that lighter ratio to achieve a darker color. If you're doing lighter coats and you just want one coat, that can work, but it gives a real good consistency when you add that second coat. It really kind of blends everything together. It's a little bit different, very similar to as if you're doing this on a sealed floor. You got to be a little bit more careful with how you apply it, just because you do have the risk of a little bit more streaks. And to kind of go back a little bit, you know, one of the things we do recommend, and what we've seen over time, is that this is best to do during on raw wood, just because the consistency, the overall look on that first coat looks a lot better than the second. But once you get practice, once you get better with it, raw wood, sealed wood, anything's really open game. So I think just really getting familiar with this process is really the key here. The other thing you want to be careful with is multiple coats. Is the more you add, the darker it's going to get. You know, and so if you're not careful, sooner or later you might end up with solid painted, like a solid painted look. So you got to keep that in mind too, with how you want, what color you want to get, and that's just best to identify early on, so you don't get too dark and then you just have a painted floor. But there's a way to do it, and I think just getting your hands dirty with it and practicing, I think you'll learn your best process and reach out to us. We'll be glad to help out with any questions you might have. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a second coat. Very similar to the first coat. We're going to use the same applicators. We're going to use one to apply to get it around, and one second one that's more dry to absorb and take up any excess. Same thing applies with the first coat. Just pour it out your line. No need to abrade, and that's kind of a nice thing about this, is you can go right on top of it. You can hot coat right on top, as long as it's within that 24-hour window. Which with something like this, you can get right back on it with that second coat within about 45 minutes to 35 to 45 minutes. So pretty quick on this, which makes it again really nice and a good advantage to doing a process like this. One of the other questions that we get all the time is, we'll talk about this again, I imagine, but if you're going oil on top of this, you don't want to, or you're going to need an abrade between a water-based coat and an oil-based coat. For something like this, you get your color down and then put a second coat or a third final coat of DTS, just a clear sealer on top. That way you lock that color in, and when you go back to abrade it, you're abrading that clear coat and not the color coat, so you're not going to be taking anything off of it. Okay, so we've got that smoothed in there. And come back around and just, again, keep your lines as straight as possible. You're going to start off on the mask and finish on the mask. Okay, that's pretty good. Again, you got a little bit of time to work here, so you can just make sure you get everything covered where you want it. One trick that we've learned too is when you're getting up against paint, it's just kind of a best practice to come from the tape, or when you're in your tape, come from the tape onto the wood, so that you're not pushing or injecting any of that color underneath that tape. It's just going to help you have cleaner lines when you come to pull the tape later. So now I've got the paint, glaze everywhere. Let me finish it off. It's always good to have a rag there too, if you need, just to kind of take off on it, just to get some of that excess out, keep that applicator dry. There we go. You can do another coat if you want. We typically don't recommend more than 3 coats in a day. If you do, you just got to be really careful about your dry times, about your overall process, because that's the other thing to always keep in mind is how many coats in what amount of time. But there's 2 coats, let it dry, and you're ready to go with your DTS or your seal coat, or finished right on top.
Hey everyone, so we're going to do a demonstration on a 2-part stencil. Prater's Sports Flooring out of Chattanooga provided the stencil for us, and we work a lot with them in doing these sorts of things. But again, get a relationship with a sport flooring contractor who does this kind of stuff. If you need help, if you're doing a commercial or custom residential and you need some stencils and stuff made. First item though is going back to one of our commandments on keeping it clean. So if we have any pebbles or dust, debris, The adhesives and stuff on these things stick a lot better to nice smooth sealer coats that we also abraded to make sure they were nice and smooth. So we'll just clean the floor off real quick and then we can move these on. Now what you're going to see is the two parts of this being this anchor is the first part is going to be all of the blue, even the little blue in the rope that you see here. Actually the whole rope will end up being blue. And then when we move the second stencil on, it will give us all the divisions and stuff in the rope, and that will only be the gray color or whatever color we want to make it. And I think we'll play around a little bit and put a bunch of different colors in there. But the other thing you're going to notice, and if you get into multi-layer stencils, is these registration marks. So we want to make sure that those stay on the floor when we pull up the stencil, because that is going to let us then take the part B to the stencil, line it up so that these rope parts, right, when we put it back over the top, line up with the rope as it is in the main stencil or our base stencil. Okay? So what we'll do is get this situated out on the floor, kind of where we want it. And then what we're going to do is create what they call a hinge. So we could, if we wanted to, try to line this up with a board seam, or just get the anchor situated how we want it on the floor, whether it's straight up and down or at a slight angle. A lot of times they will give you, the registration marks can also help with that alignment, because they should be lined up north to south and east as west as well. Or if that's what you ask them to do to help that alignment, they can make sure those are lined up. But we'll do what they call a hinge. And so we're going to take blue tape. We're going to make sure the stencil stays nice and flat as we go across it. And we don't want to just rely on one piece of blue tape. So we like to use plenty of blue tape just to secure everything on the floor. But you'll see that this is a key to getting this, because we don't want this thing to shift at all, right, while we're putting this together. So once we have our hinge down, then we can flip this forward and then remove the backing. And again, carefully, so we don't want to pull it off this hinge. And you also want to make sure that nothing else is coming with your backing here. And this is real sticky now, right? This is the part that's going to go down onto the floor, adhere itself to the floor, and kind of mask everything else off. So especially on larger ones like this, you want to grab that side, Phil, is if you're trying to do this by yourself and the thing folds over on you and sticks to itself, then grab this side, you're going to find how sticky this stuff is, that it'll be real difficult then to get it down. So then it's nice to have a big straight edge and just start from your bottom up, and really what we're trying to do is just minimize any bubbles. So as Phil's doing is a good job holding it up while I'm kind of bringing it down to the ground. We're trying to minimize, and you're always going to get bubbles. It's just part of the game here. But really what we want is in our main logo here to try to minimize any bubbles that we're getting there. So once we've got that down, now we've got it initially stuck. Now you take your squeegees, and I like to start right inside and push everything out into the rest of the area that's going to be stuck down. Because it doesn't matter if I have bubbles there. What I'm trying to do is make sure I have no or minimal bubbles right on my edge there. And again, your registration marks, we want to make sure they're stuck down. And again, you can see, you can hear the bubbles pop. You can see we got a big one right here, so if I can just push that in a little bit, I'm good with that. but we want to get the whole thing stuck down to the floor. Yeah. If we get a real bad bubble, especially if it's right next to our design, we can always take a, our utility knife or something and pop it and then straighten it out. But anywhere where you pierce your mask here, I'm going to take a piece of blue tape, and just as a best practice, even if I think it's a really small, just a pinhole, I'm still going to put a piece of blue tape there. One, to remind myself that I put a hole there, but two, just to try to safeguard against anything going through. And then when you're pulling your second layer of backing off, again, you want to go slow. It usually helps to get two guys and to stay low to the ground. And then again, watch your design to make sure nothing's peeling off. If it is, flip it back over, hit it with your squeegee, and you should be good to go. This is a great core workout too, so if you're having some abdominal strength issues, doing stencils is a great way to get that core strength back up to where you'd like it to be. I obviously have not been doing enough stencil work. And it's usually these little pieces, right, like this, that you got to watch, make sure that that doesn't come up with your backing. And as we said, you've got bubbles. Here's a big bubble right here, right? I don't care because it's out here. It doesn't matter. What I'm worried about or want to take care of is any bubbles that are right here on my edge where then I'm going to get paint bleeding underneath. So right when we put the mask down, we'll go ahead and go back to work on this, getting those bubbles squeezed out. If I do have a wrinkle, right, you can try to take your nail, the back side of your nail, kind of try to squeeze that down. I'm still probably going to get a bit of a bleed there. But it's something I can come back with, just the sharp part of my scraper if I need to take care of some of those and scrape them out once we pull the mask up. It's not a problem. And even if we put a mask down and it's, a while before we come back to it, again, sometimes those bubbles can kind of reform or move under there. So again, right before we put paint down, I'm going to want to come back and kind of re-hit this with my squeegees just to give me the best chance of not having any runners underneath there. But I think that's good. I think we can go ahead and paint it. Now, one quick thing. So we're going to use, because all this is supposed to be blue, so we'll go ahead and do that. We may add some other colors to it later. But my registration marks here. So if I think the guy I'm working with might get a little carried away with the paint and accidentally roll over these, I don't want paint ending up in those marks. So I can always take, again, my blue tape for right now, just tape back over these, cover them up, and then my guy can go crazy.
So one of the rollers, a few things that Todd's mentioning is key is re-rolling before you paint. Especially if you let it sit for a while, you're going to want to re-roll those lines like he mentioned. You can also use one of the tape machines that we use on the sports side with the rollers to go through and roll them as well. Just really want to make sure you have that good, nice, contact with the paper and where your paint's going to be. Another thing here to keep in mind is what he mentioned was with the sealer. You want that real nice smooth coat. A lot of times you'll put your first coat of sealer down and you'll get a lot of grain rays with that. What we like to do if you want a hot coat, but we do recommend an abrade between those two coats so that when you do put your second coat of sealer down, you've got that real nice smooth surface that's going to give you that seal that you need when you're putting down your stencil. As far as our paint goes, Water-based paint, our Super Sport paint has been a great product to use for a lot of stencils, just because you can do multiple coats, multiple colors all in one day. And the dry times are really what makes this product a great product. With the rollers, we like our NanoFlock roller. You can use a 1/4 inch nap roller, but we really like this Nano roller just because it puts it down nice and smooth, really consistent, and you don't have a lot of stipple, which is another good part of why we like this paint. So what we're gonna do now is go through and put down a coat.
Also, when you're painting, and probably something on this size, not anything that's going to get away from us, but when we've done some of the larger sport floor stencils, again, feathering while you're painting, right? So I don't want to take my paint and just go any which way with my roller and hope that any stop-start marks just go away, flow out, level. So we're still going to, one, go with the grain of the wood when we can, or go with the flow of the stencil design that's on there. But just know, if I leave heavy marks, light marks, whatever, within that paint, probably gonna have to go back and abrade those to smooth them out before I put on my next coat or before we put finish on. So if you take your time, do a nice job with your feathering, then everything comes out nice and smooth and you save yourself a lot of time between coats. Also with the Super Sport paint, compared to Cortline's paint, so Cortline's, like oil modified finish, takes longer to dry. Cortline's, we'd rather see guys do thinner coats and then an additional coat if needed, just to cover, than trying to do one coat that's too heavy to start. And usually on on the logos that we work on the sport floors that run between the volleyball lines, so you're about a 20 by 20 design there, you can go ahead and, as soon as you're done on one side, go back to the other side. In most locales, yeah, it depends a little bit on what your temperature and humidity are, but usually it's dry enough on that side where I can start again on that second coat, whereas if I'm putting Cortlines or oil-based paint down, I've got to wait several hours before I can go back and try to put a second coat on there, just because it takes so much longer to dry. The other nice thing about the Super Sport paint, again, because it is a water-based product, if I'm putting water-based finish over the top, I don't have to abrade it before I put finish on top. Now, if I've got some start-stop marks, if we got some debris in it, if it's not nice and smooth, I may want to abrade it anyway. But if I don't have to, if it's if I've got a nice paint job going, and I can just coat it with finish, again, I save myself a whole lot of headaches there, because especially if I've got multicolor stencils or multicolor logo or design, you start abrading it, you're going to spread one color of dust into another. Sometimes you may not see that, and then you're going to have what we call ghosting around the outside of that particular color, and you may lock that into the floor. So you got to make sure you clean that real well. We will tend to clean that on a sport floor with the power scrubber, because when you hit this with a diamond, again, which is typically what we'll use on the sport floor to abrade it, you create a real fine dust, and it sticks really well to anything else around it. So we found that, one, using the Tampico brush then on that, or using the power scrubber, really cleans any of that fine dust off of your design and around on the surrounding floor where we've already got sealer. Gives us a really nice clean palette to come back and then lock everything in with our coats of clear finish. So that's our two-part stencil, getting the base layer down and just getting started with our blue paint. We'll probably put another coat down, and then we'll come back, put the second layer of our stencil down, lining it up with our registration marks, finish out the colors there, but we'll save that for part 2 of this series on sport floor techniques for residential and commercial floors. All right, so we're wrapping up part 1 here, and we introduced you guys to a lot of different things. So we want to go back and just cover a few of the key points before we let you go, and so you can get ready for part 2. But Bob, thinking about all the stuff that we went over, what are a couple things that you might leave with everybody as key points to remember?
I think really, it's been a little while since I've worked with a lot of these products, being over at the Machine Service Center. So really, reading the directions has kind of been a big one for me here. So having to kind of read through all the different dry times, and then also mixing a lot of these different products together has kind of been a little bit of a, I would say a learning curve, but definitely relearning some of the products itself. So those two are really been some important ones.
Yeah, I mean, really now when you get into this, and depending on how complex the design and the system is and everything else, you could be mixing oil-based products, water-based products, stain, glazes, different sheens of finishes, lots of different stuff that typically we might not layer those in a regular residential job, but you know, when we get into this kind of stuff, we are. So I think those are two really good ones. Read the directions, mix the products. Absolutely. Right? Yeah. Phil, how about from the sport world and just making this transfer over to residential, commercial?
I mean, I think it gives a lot of opportunities, new opportunities for the contractors out there to kind of establish a new look, new design, really think outside the box on what they can achieve, whether it's residential, whether it's in a commercial setting. I mean, you have a lot of options here with different colors, different processes, like you said. It really opens the door, and just really recommend that you practice, get good at what you want, and maybe even find your style. But it gives you a lot of new ways to really just create some very unique and beautiful looking floors.
Yeah, true. And use your resources, right? So whether it's call and Phil or the other Bona Sport flooring guys, maybe your territory managers too, making a relationship with your local sport contractor if they're up to that sort of thing, which most of them are. I mean, they specialize in their business, you specialize in yours. There's no reason a lot of times why those two can't come together in a kind of a symbiotic relationship where you guys can share some stuff back and forth. And then even think so far outside the box as your professional artist guild, right? We'll go into that more in part 2, but just to give you a little teaser there, if you really want to spice things up and do something really custom, have somebody who's an actual artist come in and do something on the floor. So that's it for part 1. Part 2 is going to be coming up, and we'll cover a lot more of this stuff in there, including more stain, more paint, more glaze. Don't forget about our podcast, On the Floor with Wayne and Rob. You can catch that on anywhere that you tend to download your podcasts. You can also get more Bona training videos on our professional YouTube channel, and you can always call our tech services line at 800-872-5515. But other than that, thanks for joining today. Hope you guys learned a lot. We got a lot more in store for you with part 2.